Look at this photo. Look at that smile. It is June 28, 2007, and this young man just became the future of basketball. He is 7 feet tall, and 20 days past his 19th birthday. The suit is new. The cap is new. The number 1 is his, and every scout in America agrees he earned it. They are calling him the safest pick in a generation. Some are calling him the next great center, maybe the greatest one ever. And the man himself will one day look back at nights like this and call himself something else entirely. He will call himself the biggest bust in NBA history. Those are his words, not mine. But here is what makes this story worth 30 minutes of your life. There are 7 surgeries in it. There is an arrest in it. There is a college diploma in it, earned 12 years too late, or maybe exactly on time. And the cruelest part of this story is none of those things. The cruelest part is hiding in this photo, in plain sight, and it was there years before anyone in that room ever heard the name Greg Oden. Look at that smile one more time. Now look lower. Look at his knees, because nobody else in that room did. To understand this photo, you have to leave the bright lights and go back to a bus stop in Indianapolis, Indiana. A kid is standing there, waiting, and something inside his body is quietly going wrong. Greg Oden grew up mostly in Indiana, raised by his mother, a big quiet kid in a state where basketball is closer to a religion than a sport. And he grew fast, too fast. Years later, as a grown man, Oden would tell a story from the 6th grade that reframes everything you think you know about his career. He has said that he was growing so violently that his leg was, in his words, falling out of his hip. He has described going in for an X-ray, riding the bus home, and his mother meeting him at the bus stop just to drive him straight back to the hospital because the doctors had called. One more day like that, they reportedly told him, and the leg would give way completely. He has said he still carries 2 pins in that hip today, and that he walked with a limp for most of his life because his body simply got used to it. Remember that bus stop. Remember those pins. We will come back to them, because almost nobody talking about Greg Oden ever does. The world would later invent 100 theories about what went wrong with this man. Bad luck, a cursed franchise, a fragile mind. The real answer was riding a city bus home from an X-ray before he ever dunked a basketball. But here is the thing about a body like that. When it works, it is a miracle. And through high school, it worked. At Lawrence North High School in Indianapolis, Greg Oden was not a prospect. He was an event. He led his school to 3 consecutive Indiana state championships in the biggest class in the state. He was named Indiana Mr. Basketball. He was the Gatorade National Player of the Year not once but twice, and the Naismith Prep Player of the Year on top of it. Indiana has produced basketball royalty for a century, and even by that standard, people spoke about this teenager in a different tone of voice. His college coach, Thad Matta, would later say that only 2 high school players he ever saw were on that level. One of them was LeBron James. The other was Greg Oden. Sit with that for a second. The other one was LeBron James. And when Oden arrived at Ohio State University in the fall of 2006, he did something that, in hindsight, reads like a warning label the whole sport chose to ignore. He showed up injured. A torn ligament in his right wrist from his senior year of high school had required surgery, and it kept him off the court to start the season. When he finally played, the wrist was still so compromised that early on he shot his free throws left-handed. Reportedly a freshman center, playing top-level college basketball, shooting with the wrong hand. And he dominated anyway. Nearly 16 points a game, nearly 10 rebounds, more than 3 blocked shots a night. He was named the best defensive player in college basketball, and he dragged Ohio State all the way to the national championship game, where they finally fell to Florida. 1 season. That was all he gave college basketball, and it was all he needed. The message to the NBA was simple. This is what the broken version looks like. Imagine the healthy one. That spring, 30 NBA franchises imagined exactly that. And in May of 2007, a ping-pong ball changed the history of 2 cities. The NBA draft lottery is a strange piece of American sports theater. The worst teams get numbered balls in a machine, and luck decides who picks first. For our European viewers, imagine the biggest clubs in the world lining up once a year to win the right to sign the best teenager on the planet, for almost nothing, before anyone else can speak to him. That is the draft. And in 2007, against the odds, the winner was Portland, Oregon. Portland is not Los Angeles. It is not New York. It is a rainy, proud, mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest, with exactly one major team in any of the big American leagues, and that team is the Trail Blazers. When the Blazers win, the whole city wins. They call it Rip City, and it had been waiting for a savior for decades. Now the ping-pong balls had handed them one. Better than one, actually. They had handed them a choice. Because 2007 was not an ordinary draft. There were two teenagers at the top of it, and both looked like franchise changers. One was Greg Oden, the giant, the fortress, the once-a-generation defensive anchor. The other was a skinny 6'9" scoring machine out of Texas who could shoot from anywhere on the floor, a kid named Kevin Durant. Everyone in Portland knew the history. Everyone. 23 years earlier, this same franchise had held a top pick, looked at a guard from North Carolina named Michael Jordan, and chosen a 7-footer named Sam Bowie instead. Bowie's legs betrayed him. Jordan became Jordan. It is the most famous draft mistake in the history of sports, and it belongs to Portland. So in June of 2007, the Trail Blazers stood at the exact same crossroads, holding the exact same kind of choice. Giant or scorer, certainty or lightning. They chose the giant. And on draft night, when that smiling 19-year-old pulled on the red and black cap, almost nobody called it a mistake. That is the part people forget now, and we will get to why it matters. 3 months later, before Greg Oden had played a single second of NBA basketball, a surgeon picked up a scalpel. In September of 2007, the Trail Blazers announced that their #1 pick needed what they described as a routine look at his right knee. What happened on the table was not routine. The surgeon found damaged cartilage, and the procedure became something every basketball fan has learned to fear: microfracture surgery. Understand what those two words meant in 2007. Microfracture is not a repair, it is a gamble. The surgeon drills tiny holes into the bone itself, hoping the body responds by growing scar cartilage where the real cartilage used to be. Some players come back from it. Some come back slower, heavier, a step behind, and some never really come back at all. It is the kind of surgery that ends careers quietly, years after the headlines move on. Greg Oden had not yet played 1 minute in the NBA, and his rookie season was over before it began. Think about the pressure of that year. He was the #1 pick, the savior of Rip City, and his job was to sit in street clothes and watch his own team, and watch something far worse. Because down in Seattle, and then in Oklahoma City, the skinny kid taken 1 pick after him was not sitting. Kevin Durant played all 82 games as a rookie and was named the NBA's Rookie of the Year. The comparison that would swallow Greg Oden's entire life had officially begun, and he had not touched a basketball in a game that counted. Still, Portland stayed calm, and honestly, they had reasons to. The roster was young and genuinely gifted. Brandon Roy, their brilliant young guard, had just been Rookie of the Year himself. LaMarcus Aldridge was blossoming into a star forward. Add a healthy Oden, and the Blazers believed they had a big three that could rule the next decade of basketball. The plan was still alive, it was just delayed. And then came October 28th, 2008, opening night. Portland against the Los Angeles Lakers. 489 days after the draft, Greg Oden finally stepped onto an NBA floor. His debut lasted less than 13 minutes. In a collision under the basket, reportedly with Lakers guard Derek Fisher, Oden went down clutching his foot, and he limped out of his own first game. The injury itself was minor, a sprain, a couple of weeks. But something larger happened that night, something you cannot see on an X-ray. A pattern was born. Hope, then a snap. Hope, then a snap. For the rest of his career, every good night would arrive carrying a question mark, and 40,000 eyes would drop to his legs every time he hit the floor. Go back to the draft night photo for a moment. That smile, that cap, barely 16 months separate that picture from the night he limped out of his debut. 16 months, and the surest thing in basketball had already become the sport's most fragile hope. And yet, here is the part of this story that the word bust has erased, and it deserves to be said clearly. When Greg Oden actually played basketball, he was good. Not good for a broken player. Good. That rookie year, the real one, 2008 to 2009, he appeared in 61 games. He gave Portland nearly 9 points and 7 rebounds a night in limited minutes, and around the rim he was exactly the fortress the scouts had promised. His career shooting percentage would end up north of 57%. His block numbers, minute for minute, were elite. There were nights, real nights, when he caught the ball deep, dunked through grown men, swallowed shots at the other end, and you could see it, the whole blueprint. The player Thad Matta believed could become the best center who ever lived, flickering in and out of existence like a radio signal from the future. The following season, the signal got stronger. Late in 2009, Oden was playing the best basketball of his life. His numbers were up across the board. Portland was winning. For the first time since draft night, the city allowed itself to believe again. What the city could not see was what the Knights looked like. Because years later, Oden himself would pull back the curtain on this exact period, and his honesty is the reason this story can be told at all. He drank, he admitted, when he played badly, and then he drank when he played well, to celebrate. He was a 20-year-old #1 pick carrying the expectations of a franchise, a fan base, and a comparison to a superstar he did not choose, and by his own account, he never learned a healthy way to hold any of it. He did not limit himself when he started drinking, he later said, and he named the problem with a word most athletes spend their whole lives avoiding. He called it alcoholic. Nobody in Portland knew. On the surface, in December of 2009, the story was finally turning. The Giant was upright. The plan was working. December 5th, home game against Houston. First quarter. Greg Oden rises for a defensive play he had made 10,000 times, comes down, and his left knee simply gives out. No collision this time, no opponent to blame. The kneecap itself had fractured, and the big man hit the floor screaming in front of a home crowd that went silent as a church. Season over. Again. Here is the detail that hurts most, and nobody in the building could have known it that night. That game, December 5th, 2009, was the last time Greg Oden ever wore a Portland Trail Blazers uniform in a game that counted. The #1 pick, the savior of Rip City, had just played his final home minute at 21 years old. The franchise would spend 2.5 more years waiting for him. The wait was already pointless. Nobody knew. And while the arena went quiet in Portland, 600 miles of bad news were only getting started, because the knee that shattered that night was the left one. The microfracture in 2007 had been on the right. Both legs were now keeping secrets. And back at a bus stop in Indianapolis, a 6th grader with 2 pins in his hip could have told them how this ends. The rehab began the way rehabs do, with a calendar and a promise. The fractured kneecap would heal. 2010 would be the comeback year. By now, you know this rhythm. Hope, then a snap. In November of 2010, before Oden could return, the Blazers announced that his left knee, the newly repaired one, needed surgery again. And once again, a procedure that was supposed to be small became the word Portland had learned to dread. Microfracture, his second, this time on the other leg. Another season, gone before it started. Greg Oden was 22 years old, and he had now missed more full seasons than he had played. And it is here, at the bottom of this spiral, that we should finally close the question, this story opened at a bus stop in Indianapolis. Because by now the theories were everywhere. Portland was cursed. The training staff had failed him. The team had rushed him, or babied him, or built him wrong. Sam Bowie's ghost had claimed another 7-footer. Pick your legend. The truth was quieter and much sadder, and it came from Oden himself, years later. The floor was never Portland's. The flaw was in the blueprint, a body that grew so fast it nearly tore itself apart in the 6th grade, a hip held together with pins, a lifetime of walking, running, and jumping at a tilt, hundreds of pounds landing unevenly, night after night, on joints that were never aligned the way 7-foot joints need to be. He has even said that attempts to correct those childhood problems ended up backfiring. Portland did not break Greg Oden. Greg Oden arrived pre-broken, magnificent and doomed at the same time, and no one, including the man himself, understood how completely until it was far too late. That is not a curse. That is biology, and biology does not care that you were chosen first. By early 2012, the relationship between the Giant and the city had become something almost unbearably awkward. He had not played in over 2 years. The contract situation had shrunk from franchise money to a fraction of it. Fans no longer argued about whether he would save the team. They argued about whether he would ever play basketball again at all. In February of that year, doctors scheduled what was meant to be a simple cleanup, an arthroscopic procedure to clear debris out of the battered left knee. Routine, minor, a footnote. The surgeon opened the knee, looked inside, and found more damage. And on that table, without ceremony, the cleanup became a 3rd microfracture surgery. 3rd, 2 on the left knee, 1 on the right. Add the kneecap fracture, add the rest, and the count of knee operations on this one man's legs would eventually reach 7. 7 surgeries, 3 of them the career killer kind, on a player who had just turned 24. The team's president released a statement that day, and even through the corporate language you can hear something human cracking. It was hard to put into words, he said. The heartbreak for everyone involved, but especially for Greg. Heartbreak. Franchises do not usually use that word. This one had earned it. 1 month later, in March of 2012, the Portland Trail Blazers officially released Greg Oden. Someone did the math, and the number went around the world. 1,722 days had passed since draft night. In all that time, the number 1 pick had given them 82 regular season games, exactly 1 season's worth of basketball, scattered across 5 years like loose change. And if you want to understand how cruel those years were in Portland, you only need one more sentence. Brandon Roy, the brilliant guard who was supposed to share the next decade with Oden, the other half of the dream, had already been forced to retire himself just months earlier, at 30, because his own knees had run out of cartilage. 2 futures, 1 franchise. Both careers ended by the same joint. Rip City had not just lost a player, it had watched an entire imagined decade dissolve, twice. Now look at the draft night photo again. Really look at it. The cap, the confetti behind him, the surest thing in basketball. Between that flashbulb and the release papers stand 4 surgeons, 5 seasons, and 82 games. Everyone in that photo is celebrating a future that already had an expiration date, stamped inside a teenager's hip. For Portland, the story ends there. For Greg Oden, the worst of it had not even started. Because here is what nobody tells you about being released at 24. The cameras leave, the structure leaves, the trainers, the schedule, the team plane, the identity, all of it, gone in one transaction. What stays is the pain, the rehab, and the question. And Oden has been brutally honest about what he poured into that silence. Being cut loose by Portland, he later admitted, dragged him down to some low places. Other men his age were playing more games in a single season than he had managed in 5 years. What he had instead, by his own description, were painkillers and alcohol, and nights where sleep would not come without both. He was out of the league. He was drinking. He was 24 years old and already discussed in the past tense. And then, in the summer of 2013, the phone rang. On the line was the most famous team on the planet, the 2-time defending champions, the team of LeBron James. The Miami Heat wanted Greg Oden. One more comeback. The biggest stage in basketball. What could possibly go wrong? That autumn, in a preseason game in New Orleans, Greg Oden checked in at the 5-minute mark of the first quarter. Someone counted the days. 1,418. Nearly 4 years since his last real basketball game, since that silent December night in Portland. On his very first touch of the ball, the giant caught it, rose on those ruined knees, and slammed it through the rim so hard the building gasped. The crowd applauded, and on the Miami bench, an entire roster of champions, LeBron James among them, rose to their feet and gave a preseason dunk a standing ovation. If this were a movie, that is where it would end. Freeze the frame, roll the credits, redemption complete. This is not a movie. The real season told a quieter story. Greg Oden appeared in 23 games for the Miami Heat that year. 23. He started a handful of them, gave honest minutes when his body allowed it, and spent the rest of the time where he had spent most of his adult life, on the bench, in street clothes, managing pain. The Heat marched all the way to the NBA Finals that June, chasing a third straight championship against San Antonio. They lost, and Oden watched almost all of it from the sideline, a champion-adjacent man, close enough to touch the dream and unable to stand inside it. And behind the scenes, according to later reporting, the private war had never stopped. Multiple sources described concerns about his drinking during that Miami season, nights spent at sports bars near the arena while the team traveled without him. That reporting matches what Oden himself would eventually admit about these years, that alcohol had become his answer to almost everything. The comeback story on the surface, the bottle underneath, both true at the same time. When the season ended, Miami let him go. He was a free agent, 26 years old, hoping some team, any team, would give the knees one more chance. Instead, in August of 2014, came the worst night of this story. There is no gentle way to tell this part, and there should not be. In the early hours of an August morning, police were called to his mother's home outside Indianapolis. What they found there led to the arrest of Greg Oden on battery charges involving his ex-girlfriend. Court records show he was formally charged with felony battery, along with lesser counts, and this time there was no injury to blame, no surgeon, no bad luck. This was a choice, and the legal system treated it as one. That December, Oden pleaded guilty to felony battery with moderate bodily injury. 3 remaining charges were dismissed as part of the plea. A judge sentenced him to just over 900 days of probation, a fine, a strict no-contact order protecting the woman, and 26 mandatory weeks of counseling for domestic violence and for alcohol. He accepted all of it. According to the police report from that night, his own words to the officers were an admission that he had been wrong and that he knew what had to happen next. Let that sit for a moment, without music, without spin. The kid from the draft photo, the one with the smile, was now a convicted man. Whatever sympathy his knees had earned him, this was different, and he knew it was different. Years later, he would acknowledge that the arrest, coming in the same news cycle as other domestic violence scandals rocking American sports, effectively slammed shut whatever NBA doors were still cracked open. Fair or not, no team was calling now. So the following year, he did what fading stars do. He went overseas. 1 season in China, a giant among strangers, chasing the game to the far side of the world. His body gave him a little, not enough. And when that season ended, he came home to Indiana with no team, no plan, and by his own account, a drinking habit that had grown into a daily anesthetic. He would later describe that homecoming plainly. By the time he got back from China, he said, he was drinking basically every day, numbing himself to escape one specific feeling, the feeling that it was over. Because it was over. In 2016, at 28 years old, an age when most centers are entering their prime, Greg Oden faced a camera for ESPN and retired. He would love to keep playing, he said, but he was not healthy, and he had finally stopped pretending otherwise. And then, in that same interview, he did something almost no athlete has ever done. He wrote his own obituary, out loud, in a single sentence. He said he would be remembered as the biggest bust in NBA history. Not a columnist, not a talk show host, not a Portland fan with a grudge. The man himself, hanging the heaviest label in American sports around his own neck, and adding quietly that there was nothing he could do about it. The clip went everywhere within hours, and somewhere out west, the skinny kid from the 2007 draft, now a superstar chasing his first championship, saw it. Kevin Durant had spent 9 years as the measuring stick for Greg Oden's tragedy, the ghost at every discussion of that draft. Now he picked up the phone, faced the reporters, and said something nobody expected. Nonsense. That was the word. Kevin Durant, the superstar whose greatness had defined Greg Oden's failure for a decade, stood in front of ESPN's cameras and called the biggest bust label nonsense, flatly, twice. His argument was simple and devastating. To be a bust, Durant said in essence, you have to actually get the chance to play, to show people whether you could grow. Greg Oden never got that chance. You cannot fail a test you were never allowed to take. Think about who was saying it. Not a defender hired by Oden's family, the other half of the comparison. The man who benefited most from that draft order was the one refusing to dance on it. And years later, Oden would say publicly how much that defense meant to him, that he would always give Durant nothing but praise. The rivalry that talk shows had spent a decade inventing never actually existed. One of them became a legend, the other became a lesson, and somehow they ended up on the same side of the story. But a kind word from a superstar does not rebuild a life. What rebuilt Greg Oden's life was older and less glamorous. It was a coach who never stopped answering the phone. Thad Matta, the man who once believed this kid could become the greatest center who ever lived, was still at Ohio State when Oden came home from China with nothing. And out of their conversations came an idea that sounds small and was actually enormous. Come back to campus, finish your degree, start over, not as a savior this time, just as a student. So picture this. A 28-year-old 7-footer, one of the most famous cautionary tales in sports, folding himself into a lecture hall chair between teenagers, carrying a backpack, working as a student manager for the basketball team he once headlined, rebounding for kids who grew up watching his draft night, semester after semester, year after year. And in the spring of 2019, Greg Oden walked across a stage at The Ohio State University and received his bachelor's degree in sport industry. When reporters asked him why it mattered so much, he did not talk about basketball at all. He talked about his little daughter, London. He asked, simply, how he could ever tell her to go to school and get an education if he had never gotten one himself. He wanted to be the example, not the warning, the example. Because by then, quietly, a life had been assembling itself around him. He had married Sabrina in 2017. He had gotten honest, publicly and painfully, about the drinking, about the nights when sleep only came through a haze of pills and alcohol, about the rage he felt watching younger players sign contracts worth more than his entire career while he sat at home. He once put those years in 3 words: I hated life. And by his own account, he fought his way out of that place, into sobriety, into counseling, into something like peace. The game took him back too, on new terms. A season as a graduate assistant at Ohio State, studying for a master's in coaching. Then, in 2022, Thad Matta got the head job at Butler University in Indianapolis, and one of his first calls went to his old center. 2 seasons on that staff, rising from operations director to assistant coach, helping Butler back into the postseason for the first time in years. The kid who never got a career was quietly building a second one, in his hometown, 20 minutes from the high school gyms where all of this began. And then, in 2024, he made a choice that tells you exactly who Greg Oden is now. He left coaching, not for television, not for nostalgia tours. He took a job as director of player development at a company that teaches young athletes financial literacy and mental health skills, preparing teenage stars for the exact cliff he once fell off. He travels to elite basketball academies and stands in front of rooms full of the next Greg Odens, 17 years old, already famous, already carrying futures too heavy for their bodies, and he tells them the truth. That managing your money and your mind matters as much as your jump shot. That there is a life after the last whistle, and you had better build it before you need it. He is still telling the story today. In interviews this very year, well into his late 30s, he talks about the bust label with a calm that took 2 decades to earn. He does not let the word define him anymore, he says. He notes, almost gently, that by the cold math of draft position and games played, the label fits. And then he lives a life that proves the math was measuring the wrong thing. Now look at that photo one last time. Draft night. June 28th, 2007. The suit, the cap, the confetti, the smile. For 20 years, the world has looked at this picture and seen a punchline. The pick that haunts Portland. The man they took instead of Kevin Durant. But you know what those knees cost him now. You know about the bus stop, and the pins in his hip, and the 7 surgeries, and the bottle, and the courtroom, and the lecture hall, and the graduation stage, and the little girl he refused to disappoint. So look at the smile again, and understand what you are actually seeing. Not the future of basketball. A teenager standing at the edge of the hardest life in this sport, about to lose everything he was promised, and win everything that mattered instead. Kevin Durant was right. Greg Oden was never a bust. A bust is a player who fails on the court. Greg Oden's real career never happened on a court at all. It happened after, and by that measure, the #1 pick of 2007 might be one of the few who actually lived up to it. But not every fallen star finds the way back. Next time, another photo, another #1 smile, from Chicago this time. In that story, there is a brand new motorcycle, a contract clause that forbade him from ever riding it, and one June night that ended a career in a single turn. That one does not end with a graduation.